The Vermilion News, 1897 to 1964. Pictured here in 1906. The Vermilion News was born in 1897. The first issue came off the press on June 17th of that year, with a young man named Robert Whitmore named as publisher. Robert had come to Vermilion earlier that year to see just what this flourishing Lakeport town had to offer. Returning to his home in Green Springs, Ohio, he told his father, George, that he wanted to go into the newspaper business in Vermilion. He spoke well of the town. It had 2 railroads as well as a shipping port. At the time, his father had a successful furniture-making business, so Vermilion obviously had advantages over Green Springs when it came to transporting goods. So impressed was the elder Whitmore that along with his wife Becky and 6 of their 7 children, he moved to Vermilion with initial plans to carry on with his furniture business. With the family had come a platen press and typecases they had purchased in Green Springs. Both the family and printing business settled in a building on Grant Street. The building was on the east side of Grant Street, just a few doors north of the railroad tracks. At the time it was known as the Wells Building, but originally it was a schoolhouse local persons called the Seminary. It had once stood in nearby Hanover Square. So it was in this building that the Vermilion News was really born. Mr. Whitmore's furniture-making business, however, was put on hold when Robert abruptly left the business in November 1898. Not wanting the new business to fold, Mr. Whitmore continued on, naming his mother H.A. Hattie Haven publisher. Both remained proprietors of the weekly newspaper until it was sold in 1901. Before the Vermilion News, there were other newspapers in the village. The Vermilion Bugle, 1876 to 1879. It was owned by the Amherst Free Press. And there was also the Vermilion Times that was said to be owned by a Mr. Ruggles. There are very likely others, but of them no records are known to exist. And here's something from some Vermilion trivia. Mr. Whitmore was father to late Vermilionites Zenobia Kropp and Hattie Reese, grandfather of Mary Jane Bard, and step-grandfather to the late June Irma Hayman. And here's some Vermilion trivia. Mr. Whitmore was father to late Vermilionites Zenobia Kropp and Hattie Reese, grandfather of Mary Jane Bard, and step-grandfather to the late June Irma Hayman. And here is one more bit of local trivia. The town of Vermilion was spelled with 2 L's until 1898, when the United States Post Office decided to change it to 1 L, as there were 2 other Vermilions in Ohio, Vermilion townships in Erie and Ashland counties. Now back to the news. In 1901, a young Milan man, Pearl Roscoe, and his wife of 1 year, Elizabeth, or Bessie, Bottomley, purchased the business for a few $100. Mr. Roscoe had previously worked for the Lanning Printing Company in Norwalk, the Oberlin, Ohio Weekly, and lastly was the printing foreman at the Lorraine Times-Herald. Bessie had worked as a school teacher in a 1-room schoolhouse in the Berlin-Milan, Ohio area. Together they embarked on a joint venture. They published their first issue of the Vermilion News in mid-May of 1901. On September 19, 1904, the Roscoes moved the news office and print shop into a newly constructed building. It was built on a lot they purchased from a Vermilion man named John Decker. Mr. Roscoe's father, Castleton, had overseen the construction of the building. The building was several doors south of the railroad tracks. It was also on Grant Street. It housed the print shop downstairs with an apartment upstairs where the Roscoes made their home. An early postcard picture advertisement shows their workforce at the time. Left to right, E.T. Bottomley, Patty Thompson, Bessie Roscoe, Bertha Rice, and Pearl Roscoe. Their first big newspaper press is also included in the photo. In those early years, or in days, all the presses in the shop were powered by straps connected to a line shaft that was turned by a gasoline engine just outside the building. In 1916, the Linotype, a state-of-the-art typesetting machine, was introduced to the print shop. Until that time, everything was primarily set by hand. This machine was a revolutionary improvement in not only the printing business, but promoted literacy in our world, because text for the printed page could be set so quickly. Over the years, Roscoe's business thrived. An addition was built onto the building, and more printing equipment was purchased. Along with the weekly newspaper, specialty printing was flourishing. Handbills, business cards, business forms, booklets and pamphlets, advertising posters, high school annuals, and later labels for the local pickle packing plant. Say that fast. Whatever was needed, they printed. News and advertisements were brought in from the surrounding areas: Birmingham, Huron, Brownhill, Amherst, Ogons, Berlin Heights, Florence, Ashmont, Ruggles, and Lorraine. People also enjoyed reading where Mr. and Mrs. John Doe spent the day, what occurred at council and school meetings, and about various court cases. Initially, a subscription to the news was $1 a year, but by the year 1950, it had grown to a whopping $2.50. During the wars, the Roscoes made sure servicemen and women received the news from their hometown, and the news office was one of their first stops upon their return. Many passers-by would stop in for friendly chats with Bess and Pearl, whose work days began early in the morning and did not end until late into the evening. And newcomers to town stopped by and were warmly welcomed into the community by the couple. Many youngsters stopped by after school to watch the operation of the magic Linotype machine. They were fascinated watching workers setting type by hand and locking it up in a chase, or form, for print. Sometimes they assisted by inking and running the rollers over the type on the proof press to make copies for proofreading. Many Vermilion parents were puzzled as to how their children could get so black on their way home from school. The Roscoes had other interests as well. Both were active in church work. Bessie opened a small gift shop in downtown Vermilion, known as the News Gift Store. It was located in a building just west of the old Liberty Theater. That's currently the Art Scene Art Gallery. And as the years turned, romance bloomed at the gift shop. Next door was the Western Union Telegraph Office. Jane Reese, George Whitmer's granddaughter, worked for Mrs. Roscoe. And while working there, Jane met and eventually married the telegraph operator next door, Ralph Bard. In the meanwhile, Pearl, who was always interested in photography, fixed up a special area for his darkroom and went into the taking of developing and printing of his own photographs. He fabricated a darkroom in a staircase. He fabricated a darkroom in a staircase closet in the shop, usually working after the print shop had closed for the day. When Mrs. Roscoe had dinner ready, she would come to the top of the staircase above him and bang her heel on the first step to let him know dinner was waiting. He didn't miss many meals. If a person needed an identification picture, they came to Mr. Roscoe. Many were taken outside the building under the afternoon sun, and more than a few old photographs of Vermilion were taken by Mr. Roscoe, eventually appearing on penny postcards. Bessie was very interested in literary circles, so for many years she served on the library board. As president of the board, she was instrumental in the building of the public library, also on Grant Street. That building later served the town as the local police station, and currently it is the site of the jail bed and breakfast facility. Although busy with their newspaper and gift shop, Pearl and Bessie also managed to raise a small family. Their firstborn twin daughters didn't survive. During that trying time, Bessie's family was here and assisted in the operation of the news, however ineptly. It was said that when her father, E.T. Bottomley, flipped the papers for a run, the pages were back to back, but upside down. His blooper became a family joke. A few years later, the couple was blessed with 2 daughters, Ella, who arrived for their 5th anniversary of the news in 1906, and Alice, who arrived for their 10th Christmas in Vermilion in 1911. Reading for the children reared in the environment of the news office never seemed much of a problem until starting school. Until then, reading words from right to left, bottom to top, and upside down was the way it was done. Both girls graduated from Vermilion High School. Ella continued her education at Sandusky Business School and became a part of the news staff. Alice attended Ohio State University and became a home economics teacher in the Vermilion school system and assisted in the gift shop. At the end of World War I, a young war veteran arrived in Vermilion on a stopover journey west. His aunt and uncle lived here, Reverend and Mrs. Howard Lynch of the First Congregational Church. The church was right behind the print shop. Being short of funds, the young veteran needed a job before continuing on his venture. As a boy growing up in Portland, Maine, he had acquired a small printing press as well as some type, and on his own had learned the printing trade. What better place for a job? The news office. The year was 1920, and William B. Terrence Stopover turned into planting roots. He was hired at the news office, eventually courted, and later married the boss's daughter, Ella. Together they raised a family of 4 boys and 4 girls: William Roscoe, Philip Frederick, Nancy Alice, named after a favorite horse of her father's, Albert Castleton, Pearl Elizabeth, nicknamed Ginny because of the color of her hair, Eleanor Lee, named after Bill's mother, Zella, Joan, Butch, and Richard Neal. Bill and Ella were both very active in local organizations around town, as well as attending meetings. Bill's weekly column was Fits, Facts, and Fiction, The Truth, Some Truth, and Nothing of the Truth by Bill Basil. He helped found the local American Legion Post and became its first commander. He was also active in other veteran and Masonic organizations. He enjoyed the out-of-doors as well, spending many a cold wintry night camping out with the Boy Scouts or just taking nature walks with his family. Ella, an accomplished musician, served the Congregational Church as organist for many years, as well as at St. Mary's and the Evangelical and Reformed Church. It was not unusual to see Ella running across the Victory Park on Sundays from the Congregational Church, which let out at about 11:30, to play the organ at 12 o'clock Mass for St. Mary's Church. Vermilion, as some know, is often called the town of lake captains. When Alice married, she added a name to the list, Furl Lindsay. Originally from Michigan, he settled in Vermilion. He too lent a hand at the news office during the winter months. Following retirement, he and his wife made their winter home in Stuart, Florida. They had 2 children, Janet Hancock, who passed into the hands of God in 1999, and David Roscoe Lindsay, now living in Texas. Another retired Vermilion lake captain was George Ryber of Vermilion. His wife, the former Ethel Eddy, was employed as a linotype operator at the news office. It is said that at the time of their marriage, a special edition of the news was printed with their names on the front page headlines.